to help guide an important study entitled Affordable Housing in Montana, and it was completed in December 2020 by the University of Montana Bureau of Business and Economic Research. Brandon Bridge, economist and director of forecasting at the Bureau of Business and Economic Research, was the primary researcher and author completing the study. We appreciate Brandon's research and efforts in completing the study, and then a related housing article that came out in the spring of 2021, and very timely, right in the middle of the session, entitled, it's a cover story in the Montana Business Quarterly Spring Edition, entitled Montana's Unaffordable Housing Crisis. And I think it really catches in a very concise way the challenges we've faced before you. Both the article and the study were given as resource materials attached to this talk that you can download, and I've also placed links to the studies in the chat if you want to copy those. Want to really appreciate the Montana Affordable Housing Study was funded through the support of the Montana Healthcare Foundation, highlighting the critical link between housing and healthcare in Montana communities. We appreciate the generous support of Montana Healthcare Foundation in completing this important study, and especially want to recognize Ted Madden, who's the foundation's chief operating officer, who played an active role in assisting in the completion of the study. So our appreciation to both Brandon and to Ted and everyone who helped and assisted with the study, which was a long list. So informed advocacy related to Montana affordable homes is really the primary function of the Montana Housing Coalition. And we thought and hoped that a factual housing study as to current conditions related to affordable housing would be important in preparation for the 2021 Montana legislature. So we got underway in 2019 and worked on this for a little over a year, building pieces, taking it apart, and really appreciate Brandon working with us because he had like a room full of editors at every meeting. I don't know if I would have been able to put up with it, but he was great, and we were able to pull in a lot of different information in one place, and I think it's very helpful. We think that's important in providing a factual foundation for our policy discussions related to affordable housing through valid research in order to educate legislators and the public, again, providing factual information regarding affordable housing challenges as they exist in communities all across the state of Montana. And then also discuss strategies other states have followed in addressing similar needs. And so the housing study helped provide important evidence related to the current state of affordable housing in Montana, essentially federal resources that have been used to develop affordable housing resources over many years. And so to inform our policy discussions and decisions related to housing legislation during the 2021 legislature, really just to kind of provide a picture of what the current situation looks like. Ideally, legislators base their legislative decisions on factual information that reflects real conditions and needs of those they represent, including housing needs. I say that ideally, and I'm not so naive to believe that's always the case, because we know that emotion and myths, both positive and negative, play perhaps a stronger role than evidence, facts, and statistics in many legislative decisions. But it is important to have your facts straight as your foundation for the basis for advocacy and in developing public policy and passing legislation. And I think that's why we thought a housing study was important. We recognize, to go along with this information and these statistics and stuff, that we also need this stories of real Montanans to tell their narrative of the impact that an affordable home has on their family or individuals' lives. Because that tale is really the powerful tale that numbers and statistics can't really provide. It's important to note when you're looking at the Affordable Housing in Montana study that it was completed using pre-COVID-19 housing information. If anything, the situation has only gotten worse, with housing supply further shrinking, with real struggles to even use housing assistance like housing choice vouchers due to a lack of units for rent at all, or at least within the payment standards allowed under the program, which is actually quite generous. The study begins with highlighting the cost, just minimally highlighting the cost of not addressing housing needs, particularly for the most vulnerable citizens, and just citing some information that a study that was done in Montana related to the top decile highest utilizers of homeless persons that are in the state of Montana's homeless management information system. We're looking at over the 3,600 individuals experiencing homelessness in Montana, that the top cost decile group of those individuals experiencing chronic homelessness incur over $50,000 per year individually in costs to public Medicaid budgets. That's just the Medicaid budgets, $50,000 a year. The cost of not addressing this problem is substantial. The study provides an overview of current public finance housing assistance programs and associated units addressing housing affordability in Montana and their impact on supporting affordable homes in communities across Montana. These various programs include programs that subsidize both construction or preservation of units, and then other programs that provide rent assistance to keep rents affordable to the lowest income levels. And some of the programs do a combination of both. Much of our existing affordable housing stock across the state is aging and is at risk of being lost if not preserved through major rehabilitation, or due to market pressures, owners may opt out of programs and convert to market rate housing. But the study reviews kind of the impact of the federal low-income housing tax credit program, the impact of public housing authorities, Indian housing authorities, the home program, community development block grants, the housing trust fund, the role of housing choice vouchers, both tenant-based and project-based housing, Section 8, more well known by, and then the critical role in our state of USDA rural development, providing affordable homes in small communities across the state of Montana. And then also highlighted the new state of Montana multifamily coal trust homes program, the loan program that was adopted in 2019. Brandon provided also an in-depth study of demand for affordable housing in Montana, looking closely at the 7 largest population counties in Montana: Cascade, Flathead, Gallatin, Lewis and Clark, Missoula, Butte, Silver Bow, and Yellowstone County. And you can look into the study for your areas, how in terms of demand. He details the number of households in each county that are housing cost burdening, meaning that they spend more than 30% of income on housing costs. He provides a clear picture that there exists a large gap between the large number of extremely low income and low income households and the availability of rent assisted housing that can make housing affordable for them. The study highlights the current underutilization of existing federal resources that in most states are accessed to address affordable housing needs, which are little utilized here in Montana. Primarily tax-exempt private activity bonds that are exempt from federal income taxes, which allows a project to access capital at a lower interest rate than would otherwise be attained. And they are paired with the 4% federal low-income housing tax credit. And for all extensive purposes, we've been here in Montana have been pretty much unable to fully utilize those resources. He highlights that each year Montana is unable to fund numerous well-designed affordable housing developments. Since 2016, $62 million per year in 9% federal low-income housing tax credit requests have been denied due to a lack of funding. In other states provide additional state funding, which allows these states to leverage and access these additional significant federal resources that Montana is currently leaving on the table. The study highlights examples from other states, highlighting 2 primary approaches that other states use to leverage these federal resources. So they're bringing these federal dollars into their states by making an investment of state resources. And the two primary ways is through a state direct appropriation through housing trust funds, and or the creation of a state low-income housing tax credit. And I think you'll find reading about these approaches very informative in terms of what they could mean in terms of transforming, bringing a large economic impact, and the impact they would have in terms of people's lives, the ability to live in a community without the stress of spending significant portions of your household income on housing. In these states that are highlighted, the state investment leverages the federal resources and significant private capital investment, greatly increasing the development of new affordable rental homes or the rehabilitation of existing rental properties. Again, using federal resources primarily that otherwise would be unused. A state program similar to those, state of Montana low-income housing tax credit program similar to those implemented in other states would likely allow developers to leverage 4% federal tax credits, which are currently unutilized in order to increase the supply of affordable housing in the state. An added benefit of implementing such a program is that it has the ability to spur economic activity in the near term while delaying the cost of foregone tax revenue by several years until the project is completed. Now, the key findings of the study, we'll just give a quick summary, is that what the study shows that the demand for affordable housing in Montana far outstrips supply. And again, this is pre-COVID. It's only gotten worse. For example, statewide, there were only 39 affordable housing units for every 100 households earning an extremely low income, below 30% of area median income. Also, since 2016, there have been over 30,000 applications for housing choice vouchers, with only about 4,000 issued. This indicates a demand-supply ratio of more than 7-to-1 for this program alone. Since 2012, Montana has only financed 717 affordable housing units, including acquisition, rehabilitation, and new construction, utilizing the federal 4% low-income housing tax credits that would be our resources dedicated to Montana needs that we're not able to use currently. In this same period of time, Montana has abandoned $949 million in tax-exempt private activity bonds. Again, private activity bonds are revenue-backed bonds issued by a state or local authority for a private project. These bonds are exempt from federal income taxes, which enables a project to access capital at a lower interest rate than would otherwise be attained. These private activities are used in combination with the 4% low-income housing tax credit projects. When you're unclaimed for a period of years, that resource is abandoned and is not used by Montana. A state low-income housing tax credit program similar to those implemented in other states like Colorado or South Carolina or Oklahoma, or a whole list of good examples out there, Georgia, would allow developers to leverage federal tax credits currently unutilized here in Montana in order to increase the supply of affordable housing in this state. We'll get into this. Sheila will discuss this later, but we need to note that the coalition was successful in passing House Bill 397 in this session, the Montana State Workforce Housing Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Bill. Unfortunately, Governor Gianforte vetoed the bill this past Friday, May 14th, in the last hour. It had been expected that this bill would have doubled production of tax credit projects in Montana. In closing, I would just say that we recognize the need for further research, particularly to document the impact of affordable homes, or conversely, the impact of the lack of affordable homes and its impact on our Montana communities. We frequently end up falling back to, we know that housing is different, that housing is fundamental to, if without a house, you can't hold a job in a community. Without a house, you can't live in a community. You may be in an institution if you're disabled or if you're elderly. Without, that a house generates the stability in which families can be stabilized and their children can succeed in school. Those kind of indicators are hard to track. But we do know that the cost of doing nothing is not nothing. It's actually quite substantial. Our current status quo costs us so much in terms of lack of affordable, decent homes, affordable to all Montanans, comes at a great cost to Montana families, to our economic growth, and to Montana local and state community resources, things like healthcare and our schools and criminal justice and disability services and senior services, and goes on. And so I think that's an area for further research that perhaps we can pursue as a coalition, recognizing that the story of affordable housing, we probably have to find a way that we can continue to keep updated just the current status of affordable housing. But again, thank you for everyone who worked on the study and participated. And again, appreciation to Brandon and to the Montana Healthcare Foundation as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for your leadership on that. When Michael mentioned that there's Section 8 vouchers that are awarded but cannot be utilized because there's no housing, and our shorthand for that is money, money everywhere and not a house to rent. We flat out just need more homes, more apartments in Montana. I'm going to move now into
to that point, could I just add, I was on a phone call yesterday afternoon that statewide, the Helena Housing Authority is one of the local agencies that administers the state Section 8 program for the Tri-County Helena area, and all the other agencies were on the phone call with MDOC talking about an award of an allocation of emergency housing vouchers to the state of Montana. And a big part of the discussion was, would we be able to actually utilize them? Because there just isn't a supply of housing. And one of the things that tax credit properties by law required to take Section 8 vouchers. And so that alone creates an avenue and an opportunity to live in some of the finest, highest quality housing in the community. And so we're currently are unable to use that. We're considering perhaps not even accepting vouchers because we can't use them. I think we're going to take them and we're going to figure it out, but that's what we're left with. It's a challenge. Thank you.
I want to thank everybody again for being interested. This is an amazing group of very large group. I'm showing 87 participants, which is fabulous. We'll have a call to action at the end of this session and hope that you will all join the Montana Housing Coalition. So my job today is to talk about the 2021 session. It was a mixture. We had times where we were elated and times where we were sorely disappointed. I might mention that my report is linked to this session on WOVA or HUVA. So you can take a look and don't worry about taking notes because it's out there. And it'll also be on the Montana Housing Coalition website. So elation, disappointment, we had many wins, chalked them up. And in the end, there was no funding for homes for working families, seniors, veterans, or those with permanent disabilities. I'll walk through the bills one by one. The five bills that we supported and were actually instrumental in getting introduced. The first of those was Senate Bill 117, which allows the Montana Board of Housing to provide grants as well as loans from the Housing Montana Fund. Tom Jacobson did a great job on this. It died in committee on a party line vote. This was step one of a strategy to seek a direct appropriation in a future session by getting the grants language into the enabling legislation for the Montana Housing Fund. Today, the Board of Housing can only do loans from that fund. The committee talked about it. They wanted to limit it so you could do grants only for 2 years, only with COVID relief, and it was just too limiting, so the bill died in committee. The second bill was to redefine the definition of a community land trust. That was successful. Representative Frank Gardner did a great job. It passed with really strong votes in the committee in both houses. And basically it was correcting some language so it allowed land trusts to be used for any type of housing as defined by law, single family condos or townhomes or any others that there might be. So that it corrected some prior misinterpretation. The third bill was a coal trust homes loan program. So this was to allocate an additional 15 million to that loans program. And the first 15 million was created in the 2019 session. Dave Fern did a great job getting that through. That 15 million was appropriated or allocated, obligated, I should say, to 7 projects, 7 housing developments, 252 new or renovated units. The bill, so this was to allocate another 15 million. The bill passed the House and then it died in Senate committee. The concern was that too much of the coal trust had already been invested in loans, not just these loans, but many different kinds of loans, business loans, etc. So when you invest too much of the coal trust in loans in Montana, it leaves too little to be invested by the Montana Board of Investments. I might note that the interest rate on the coal trust loans is equal to or better than the rate of return on the general coal trust investments, but we weren't successful in making that argument. The total amount of money in the coal trust today exceeds $1 billion. So 15 million doesn't seem like it should be a deal breaker, but we were not able to get that bill out of committee. The next bill was the housing tax credit, the state housing tax credit, very successful in 24 other states. 2 or 3 states, I think, passed one this legislative session. We got that. It was Representative Josh Cashmere out of Fort Benton. He was successful in getting it through the House committee and the full House. A close vote, but not extremely close. It passed the Senate Tax Committee and the Senate floor, and then it was re-referred to Senate and Finance and Claims. It languished there. They didn't act on it. On the very last day of the session, maybe the day prior to the very last day of the session, Senator Brian Hoven, who was a hero on this bill, he blasted it out of committee and it passed the Senate by 1 vote. So that meant it goes to the governor. So the governor had it and looked at it and looked at it, and late Friday, which was the last possible day to veto the bill, he did veto it. His veto message referred to the amount of tax credit, federal tax credit funding already available, which you and I and everyone on this call know is about 1/3 of what we need for the applications that are submitted every year. And also the possibility that the feds might send more tax credits, and then that would increase the fiscal impact on Montana's budget, since the bill pegged the amount of state tax credits to 50% of the federal tax credits. I think both of those arguments can be very well refuted, and we intend to do that, but we were not successful. I'll go on a bit of a rant here and say I listened to Governor Gianforte this morning, and he talked about housing being a serious challenge. Every worker needs a place to live. Good housing makes our community stronger. There's a housing shortage. Housing is out of reach to many Montanans. Then he went on to talk about red tape and how that's harming new housing development. And he did sign an expedited subdivision review bill. And he did talk about the emergency rental assistance program. But it's very frustrating when you see that exactly the things he talked about could have been addressed by this bill. Lastly, to sum up, Senate Bill 269 was the opportunity to purchase bill. So when you live in a manufactured housing community, you're at risk because someone owns the land underneath your home that you own. Senator Brian Hoven had 3 bills dealing with manufactured housing community, and this was in response to his constituents who live in manufactured housing communities that have been purchased by an out-of-state investment firm. That investment firm has raised rates, increased fees, and significantly harmed the well-being, the economic well-being of the people that live in these manufactured housing communities. So this bill would have provided an opportunity for a resident cooperative to purchase a community in which they live. There are 14 of those in Montana today, thanks to NeighborWorks Montana. The bill over time morphed into a bill that provides capital gains tax credit for sellers who sell to residents, government, or a nonprofit organization. So if you own a manufactured housing community and you want to sell it, and when you sell it, you have to pay capital gains tax to the state of Montana. And this bill, which was signed by the governor, provides 100% capital gains tax credit. So they don't, it's an incentive. It's the carrot rather than the stick. It's the carrot to be able to sell to residents, the government, or a nonprofit organization. The bill also creates a process where MBOH every year will send a notice to all manufactured housing community owners that details the benefits of selling to residents and provides a contact with NeighborWorks Montana to organize those residents if the owner is ready to sell. So those were our 5 bills. We had some successes. We had some serious defeats, especially on the funding side, we had defeats. The coalition also testified in support of funding homes, apartments with COVID relief funds from the American Recovery Act plan. This is called ARPA. House Bill 632, also signed by the governor, creates a series of panels that review applications for ARPA funding. And funding for housing is not specifically called out. There's one small exception for homeless dedicated housing that the legislature had to dedicate it to homeless housing because that's what the ARPA plan said. But there is a possibility that developers and cities and counties could apply for funding for infrastructure. So there's $400 million for infrastructure. And I read the bill and it doesn't say that you couldn't apply for infrastructure for new homes and apartments. So for example, maybe a city could say, you know, we know we're going to grow to the south, so we're going to extend our water and sewer lines. Another point of infrastructure, of course, is broadband, but extend those out. And that way the developer wouldn't have to pay that. So I would look forward to working with cities and counties and developers to say, let's test the system and let's apply for some infrastructure to deal with new homes and apartments that we want to have built. So that is the summary of what happened during the legislative session. I'm sure that many of you will have questions. Put those into the chat and we'll deal with those all after we've completed the conversation today. So it's my opportunity now to introduce Peggy Trenk. And as I said, Peggy was in the halls of the Capitol almost every day. I really, really appreciate all the tagging and following and help that she gave us in terms of trying to figure out which bills, talk to other lobbyists, see who could come in on our bills, and see who might come in opposed to our bills so we could talk to them early or refute their arguments. So please help me welcome Peggy Trenk, who's going to talk about the value of a lobbyist in the section.
Thanks, Sheila. And thanks everybody for the opportunity to talk to you today. Just a little background. I was with the Montana Association of Realtors for a number of years, which was really got started working with Sheila and the NeighborWorks board. And I harken back to the days when we kind of got started saying, well, we should get some money for housing. And somehow we would find we had an idea for a program and we would find a sponsor and we'd go to the legislature and the bill would get a hearing and then it would die and we'd go away for another session, come back, try it again the next time. So I really, has been fun to be part of the progress, I guess, of this effort over time, even though we did suffer some disappointments. But I don't do all the lobbying for the coalition. I want a disclaimer here. We have had last 2 sessions a firm, Strategies 360, which has done the heavy lifting on coalition priorities. I'll do some Me Too's here and there where bills that aren't on our priority list, and of course talk to them every day. And I do lobby for another group, so I'm there all the time, and we do work together. But just wanted to make sure I wasn't tooting my own horn for the coalition, because we really did have some excellent help the last 2 sessions. But I wanted to share just a little bit, I guess, about the value of having a strategic partnership for housing advocacy, sorry, I can't say that word, that includes professional representation at the legislative level, those folks that are in the halls every day. I think really the most effective approach, and I think we're getting there, we've made great progress, is to have a whole team of folks. It takes an organization like the coalition or your individual groups that come up with an idea, vet it, and spearheads a bill that finds it is a solution to a problem. And then there's those folks that have expertise in the subject matter, which are so critical. And that's where I think the coalition really shines. I mean, there's so much knowledge. I visit with our lobbying folks there, and to be able to call on some of the folks that are sitting in this session today and say, explain this to me, or a legislator doesn't understand what a tax credit program might be. And there are so many people who know this stuff inside and out. It's just quite a gift. So we bring that piece to the table too, and thank you for that. And then there's a grassroots involvement. You reach back to the people at home and in those legislators' districts and say, you know, would you please share why this matters to you with your legislator, because they always get their attention. And then finally, what I'm really going to talk about a little bit today is the bringing sort of a professional experience to the process itself. It's not so much the issue, but the process itself. And so one of the things that I should have put up a graphic if I was braver. You know, how does a bill become law? You probably all know this pretty well, but I'll just remind everybody a little bit about the steps in the process. And so a bill gets introduced in the Montana legislature. It's heard in a committee. It's assigned to a committee and heard whichever house it's introduced in. And then if you are successful in getting that bill passed out of committee, then it'll go on to the floor of the House or the Senate, depending on where it starts. And then you've got some more votes to get, at least 51. And if that passes, then it goes to the other house and we do it all over again with a committee, and then goes to the floor. Again, so the point about there's lots of votes to get along the way and lots of people to talk to. And it's not easy to pass a bill. Our legislature, as you know, meets every 2 years. They have lots to do when they get there. They have to establish a state budget, and they get all kinds of tax bills and general bills and lots of things they have to look at during the 90-day period that they meet. We have a citizen legislature. That means those same legislators, they all have jobs, they have families, they have businesses that they left behind, and they have very busy days. They start very early in the morning, committee hearings in the morning, then they go to the floor, and then they might get lunch, and then they go back to committee hearings again. And their days are very full, and many times they haven't read your bill yet when it comes time for the hearing, because they have been so busy just keeping up with all those other things. So your really great idea, and this may be the first time they've heard about it when you're standing in front of them testifying about the bill. And they also know they've got maybe 4 other bills they're going to hear that day. And so the point of all that is that this is a tough process to be in. There's a lot of people competing for their attention. There's a lot of new ideas and issues. And so you really have to think about how you bring your ideas to the legislature. There are some complications that are built into that process as well. Legislative rules, I've never understood rules like I wish I did, but there are legislative rules that are adopted that guide how a bill is heard in committee or comes out of committee, how many votes you need to do this or that, how many bills might be blasted from the floor, all kinds of things that complicate the process. And then there's also a lot of timelines that are built into the process. There's a timeline to get bills introduced. There's a timeline to get bills heard and transmitted to the other house. And then there's a timeline for amendments of those bills to come back to the first house. And that is even messier because there's differences between revenue bills and general bills. And again, point of all this is it's hard to get bills passed. So it's in that context where professional government affairs or lobbying support can really make a difference in turning your great idea into successful legislation, excuse me. There are folks, those are the folks that you'll see in the halls every day. They're talking to legislators, they're paying attention to the rules, they're watching the calendar for deadlines to see when it's best timing to get your bill heard. They can go talk to the chair and say, boy, we'd really like to get our bill heard Tuesday next week because we've got some folks in town who have a lot of knowledge about this issue and it'd be great to have them at the hearing. And they also help generate grassroots support from back home, which again, really matters to legislators to hear from folks in their districts. So as we've gotten more sophisticated in our legislative approach as a coalition and using strategic lobbying folks that help us find our way through the process. We've really gotten better, and I think that's why we've been more successful. And even though we didn't get all the way we wanted with this session, we've made great progress, is that we've talked to legislators through our lobbying team before their bill is ever heard. In fact, in some instances, we've talked to them before the session even started. We've started to build their level of understanding, create some momentum before the bill is actually heard. And that's really important. But to get that done, you've got to have it be somebody's job every day to get up and think about that. And that's why somebody's job are so important. Just to kind of give an example of how it works, and I apologize, I hope I'm not going too fast for folks, but talk a little bit about House Bill 21 that Sheila already mentioned, that which would have reauthorized $15 million for the Coal Trust multifamily loan program. House Bill 21 didn't pass this session. And if I was a betting man at the beginning of the session, that would have been the one I thought would have passed. But it does kind of give it a good example of some of the steps in the process where it was really helpful to have lobbying folks on the ground in the Capitol. It really had a good start because it was a bill that had a good track record. It was a program that we were reauthorizing. And so, you know, it by all accounts should have done pretty well. It was initiated in interim committee, which is helpful because that gave it a good head start coming into the session. It was already drafted, had a sponsor, could come into the process early, and it was heard very early in the session. And coalition, I mean, we did a good job just as a coalition getting that bill through the interim before we even brought in the professionals that helped us. So good for us. I guess you can get those to a point. But by late summer last year, the state revenue, kind of the dark clouds were gathering overhead about how is the state's budget going to be impacted by COVID-19 and what was happening in the economy. And we're starting to hear lots of conversation about, boy, don't ask for any money this session. If it has a fiscal note of, $2, don't expect it to pass. And so that was when our folks from Strategies 360 started working with us and started setting up meetings with legislators, key legislators that we knew were going to be on the committees we expected House Bill 21 and our other bills to go to. We started great advice from folks. We would have individual, I know Sheila and Andrea and others were instrumental in this. They lobbyists would set up calls with, let's say, Representative Lou Jones, who is the major driver behind the budget, and talk to him about our ideas. So educate him a little bit, but what was also extraordinarily helpful was in those conversations was those legislators would also give us ideas. They would say, boy, I think you've got a problem here and here's something you should be aware of, or maybe if you explain this a little bit differently, it would be heard better by other legislators, or help me understand this better. And while it may not have swayed all of those folks to our side, at least there was a group of folks with a lot of clout, I guess, in some respects, that at least understood what we were talking about when we came into the session. And that's hard to do unless you have a professional group of folks who know those folks, know how to get meetings set up, and know how to bring that information to them. So good for them and good for us in thinking ahead this session. Let me see what else I wanted to touch on a little bit with this bill. So we've come into the session now with House Bill 21 and had a good start in the process. It was mentioned, it was heard in the House early, made it across the House floor pretty handily, and then over to the Senate, and then hit the Senate Finance and Claims Committee, where truly there was a lot of heartburn this session about the Coal Trust and the drop in revenue that we're seeing coming into the Coal Trust Fund because the use of coal is being reduced. And the Coal Trust, just for those who don't know that, the Coal Trust, or the interest from the Coal Trust, funds a whole bunch of stuff in Montana. It funds used for water and sewer projects. There are grants that go to symphonies,
orchestras in different communities, for the Arts Council, and even some of the interest on the Cole Trust, from the Cole Trust takes care of the artwork in the Capitol building itself. So legislators are very nervous about where that money is going, and that started to really manifest itself in this session. And so because of the relationship with the lobbying folks that we had a long time, the Senate Finance and Claims chair, they were able to talk to him regularly and talk to him about what his concerns were with that program. We knew it was the Cole Trust that they were concerned about. He gave us lots of time to do some more research, to look at other options, to work with our schedule. And again, that comes because of the relationship our lobbying folks had with him, and we're talking to him every day. They could find out what he was concerned about. They could find out what other committee members were worried about. And we did our very best to answer their questions. In the end, we weren't successful, but I think we gave it 100% effort. I think we had a chance to be strategic. There was just sometimes issues that are just too big to get past. And that's what happened with House Bill 21. But as it made its way through the session, I should back up a little bit. Some of the other things our folks do for us in the lobbying community is they briefed the sponsors. The sponsors were ready with talking points at every hearing. The folks who were carrying the bills on the floor, whether it was a sponsor or the individual carrying it in the other house, they were briefed. They had talking points. They had fact sheets on legislators' desks. They had talking points for us to share with our coalition members, many of you, asking you to call your legislator or email your legislator and explain why this bill was important. And they would do it again in the other house. And sometimes they helped us with some of the media outreach as well. And again, those are just things that, unless it's somebody's job every day to think about this and make it happen with the team that they have on the ground, we couldn't get it done. And so again, House Bill 21 didn't make it, but I think it was a good case study in how having folks involved there, helping us interact with legislators, gave us the best shot we could in getting that bill passed. I think I might leave that with that as sort of an example of why it's helpful to have them on the ground. Again, we get more and more strategic. Looking at 2023, we take the lessons we learned this session and start looking at that. The earlier that we can get involved, the earlier we can start talking to legislators. And starting this interim, for example, there will be a study of the Cole Trust and all its uses, and an opportunity maybe to come back in 2023 and look at reauthorizing funds for the multifamily loan program again. But it really does take strategic help. It takes professionals and folks with their eyes and ears attuned to what's going on in the hall of the Capitol. And I really do appreciate the work that Strategies 360 did for us. And again, circle back to this coalition and to many of you on this call, your expertise really does make a difference. That tirelessness with which many of you did research and provided information to get ahead of some of the questions legislators had and some of the misinformation they had was just huge. And I'll put in a plug that I hope we'll be able to keep doing that going into 2023. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. I do want to mention that the cost of the lobbyist this year was about $66,000. So that's a very hefty amount. And that's paid for entirely by the dues that the Montana Housing Coalition members pay. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrea now to talk a little bit about the Montana Housing Coalition and how important your membership is. So go ahead, Andrea.
Thanks, Sheila. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate everybody participating in this today. I'm going to go ahead and in the chat, I will include the link to the Montana Housing Coalition website, just so that's available for people to check out at your leisure. And so the Montana Housing Coalition is a member-based nonprofit organization. We're a 501c6. And so what that means is the IRS definition of our work is that we promote the interests of our members, of you, but without the goal of making a profit. So we advocate for housing policy to benefit all of Montana. You can read more about that on the link that I just shared in the chat. The current members are a really broad range of private businesses and developers, housing advocates, local and state government. The Montana Housing Coalition does have a board of directors that serves as a steering committee, and those folks are voted in by the membership at our annual meeting. That steering committee or board meets throughout the session quite routinely to make strategic decisions between our monthly member meetings. And then we report out to our members at our monthly meetings. As Peggy just outlined for you, the coalition has gotten quite a bit more sophisticated over the years. And one of the things that we've recognized is there's really, you can't let your foot off the gas pedal. You just cannot let your foot off the gas pedal. And so we meet rather routinely through outside of the session to prepare for it. So as Peggy outlined, not only are we identifying our priorities, which the membership votes on, but we also need to lay out, quite a bit of a runway in terms of getting enough members so we have enough dues to hire the lobbyists early on to do a lot of those interim legislative session meetings. Because again, we are doing community conversations and working one-on-one with legislators across the state to better develop relationships and for them to understand our sector and the challenges that we're facing and the solutions that we're proposing. Throughout the session and even leading up to it, after we've identified our priorities, so let's take, for example, a couple of the bills we've talked about today, House Bill 21 being the reauthorization of the Coal Trust loan program, or House Bill 397, which was the state housing tax credit. We had working groups for those, out of our membership, some folks that have particular expertise in like for example, tax credit development would be on an ad hoc committee that we could make sure we are informing our piece of legislation as well as we possibly could, because just like a living thing, a piece of legislation does evolve over time. As Peggy mentioned, in those one-on-one sessions or in days of yore and maybe the future when we're meeting in person, we may be having regional meetings where there's multiple legislators in a room, and they are willing to provide advice and feedback to us. And as we move through, we may be looking at changing the bill prior to it getting actually initiated in the legislative process. And then even then, we all have to be prepared for on the floor when amendments happen. We need to be prepared for reacting to those and whether we are willing to accept those amendments and how how that might affect the end product, the goal of what we're working on. So again, those ad hoc committees and that steering committee are the people on call, ready to react. Sometimes at a moment's notice. Sometimes at 9 o'clock at night. Not always. Most of the time, it's during business hours. So I'll just reiterate that, as far as a group of people and a membership organization, we really have been building on years of success. And I know Peggy already mentioned that we do work in the interim, and the ability for us to reach out to a broad base of membership and find some of the most impactful testimony when we are not only in session, but also delivering testimony and proposed solutions a la legislation in these interim committees is really critical. And so they know it's a shout out really to get involved and we need you. We stay connected with the chair of these committees leading up to the session, and the success of that. And again, we do have a professional lobbying firm that helps us continue to make this connection. And the chairs of these committees really can help initiate this legislation early on in the session. They can make sure that our bills are given the priority that's necessary. So having this consistent communication, relationship building, and education with legislative members is really critical. So membership dues in the coalition are the only source of income that we have to pay our expenses. And our primary expense is the third-party lobbyists that we mentioned. Strategies 360 is who we've been working with, and they've done an excellent job. And so we really depend on our dues for paying a lobbyist. The dues are on our website, but just so you know, a voting member is $1,100 per year. And then there are different associate levels depending on the size of your organization. So $550 or $100. And then there is an individual associate membership for $50 as well. We have 26 voting members that are currently part of the coalition and 15 other members that are at varying associate and individual levels. We really need, to expand. While we have quite a few members, we need to expand the number of active members on our coalition. The feedback that we've gotten over the years, and this is tricky for all of us, is, for those of us that are in the development world, we hire a lot of private sector businesses. We hire a lot of folks that are in the construction trades. We hire a lot of architects. We hire a lot of attorneys. We hire a lot of folks to get this work done, which is really going back to Michael's point earlier. We really have drilled home, and we need to continue to do a good job and a better job about indicating just how good this work is for Montana's economy. That said, we really need more of those kind of folks in our membership and willing to be part of our advocacy leading up to the session and during the session. It's hard. We are in one of the busiest construction cycles many of us have seen. It's very challenging to ask a successful, busy contractor to stop what they're doing and come and provide testimony. And yet it is very critical that we do that, because a lot of these folks are viewed as very credible employers and folks that are getting work done around the state. And these legislators need help sometimes understanding that these are the same folks that are building homes that Montanans can afford. That's what we're talking about. So if we can get this legislation passed, there is more opportunity, more job growth, more economic impact in our state. So why should you join? We want to build support for a Montana-based housing policy from as broad of a range of interests as possible. And as a member, you'll be kept up to date on legislative issues, as well as invited to attend meetings or briefings that are in your area, assuming that we'll all be meeting in an area near you sometime soon. We all know that this sector, housing, real estate, is multifaceted. It's incredibly complex. There are many factors that affect it and that are affected by it. And we need as many voices as possible at the table. One of the areas that we have heard about during this housing conference, and we'll hear more about, is the concept of housing as healthcare. And that, for example, in my mind, I see the tendrils of membership opportunities there. We do have a couple of larger hospital associations that are part of our members. And fortunately, throughout the session, we had the Home Healthcare Association come and the Montana Healthcare Association come and provide testimony to be able to articulate why affordable homes are so critically important to not only their workforce, but also to their patient care. And these are the kinds of testimony and kind of membership support that we really need to help illustrate the impact of this work to legislators, so they'll take these bills seriously, and not that they don't take them seriously, but that they get behind them and see them all the way through. So if you cannot pay to join, contact us. We are a membership and a dues-based organization. Like we said, that's the only revenue we have to actually get this work done at the legislature. That said, we want as many voices at the table as possible, and we will find a way to get you involved. So our contact information is on the Montana Housing Coalition website. And then anybody that's been part of this panel, Sheila, Michael, Peggy, myself, and also Kaya Peterson with NeighborWorks Montana. we are all available to answer any questions. By the way, I also should mention, I'm also a board member with NeighborWorks Montana, and I'm drinking from my NeighborWorks Montana cup during this conference. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. But anyway, I just want to thank everybody for your interest in this. And I want to congratulate the work that's been done by all of us and our colleagues, because we've gotten further along in this session than we think we ever have. And it's very exciting, and we need to keep this momentum moving forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrea, Michael, Peggy, done a great job kind of outlining the importance of having a legislative effort. I just wanted to mention a couple.
Well, I want to point out that we did it to the second in terms of our timing.
Oh, perfect. All right. That's very unusual.
Who would have guessed that? That was amazing.
Right. Very, very unusual for the four of us and right on time. I do want to mention a couple things. One is I want to give a thank you, a shout out to the MOH, the Montana Board of Housing staff. They supported all of those bills with fiscal notes. They aren't really able to testify for, but did a tremendous backgrounding for the legislature and for us in all of that. So I want to thank them. I just wanted to close by telling you all why this is so compelling to me. I've been a member of the Board of Housing for 10 years, and the hardest 2 days of my life are one, when we have to take the applications and narrow them down to 8, 15, 16, 18 applications and narrow them down to 8. And then those people submit full applications and we narrow it down and we're able to fund 5, maybe 6. And the reason those days are so difficult is that those other organizations and those other great developments that are sorely needed in the community go unfunded. They don't get built. They don't get renovated. And so the reason I am so compelled to work on this legislative effort is because I want to see all 14 or 16 or 18 funded, because I know it's so important to these communities. It's so important to the people that live in Montana. So I want to encourage you to join today, the Montana Housing Coalition. But I also want to tell you that tomorrow at lunch, we'll have a virtual meetup and we'll talk about what our next steps are. And of course, we'll do everything we did this year, but maybe there's more. Maybe there's more we can do. Maybe this requires a ballot initiative. Maybe there's another way to achieve a funding process for housing in Montana. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Kaya, and we're happy to answer whatever questions you might have.
Wonderful, thank you. So 2 o'clock on the nose. This afternoon session runs for 90 minutes, but there is a pause here. And if anyone needs to hop off, we know everybody's running in a million directions. So that's the presentation portion, and we have another half hour for Q&A for any of you who want to stick around and discuss this topic further. We encourage you to put your questions in the chat. And you can also post questions on Whova if you're joining us through the app and that's easier for you. We are monitoring the chat there. You can also take yourself off of mute and have a conversation right now directly with everybody here. So it looks like we do have one question in Whova to get us started. And the question is, how will the ERVs, I don't know if I know what that acronym is, allocated to the Department of Commerce be utilized?
ERV? I think we'll have to ask that questioner for more information.
Yeah, or Cheryl's popping on it. So it looks like she knows what that is.
Oh, okay, go ahead, Cheryl.
Emergency rental vouchers, or I believe that's the acronym. So those are the additional vouchers to target homeless and at risk of homeless, victims of domestic violence that was included in the American Rescue Plan Act. And I think we had an initial meeting with field agencies and bought buzzes on Monday. And so we're still discussing because we just got the notification of the award last week. And we're trying to brainstorm options. It's there's a lot involved for that program to get it up and going. So we look forward to having some more discussions with people before we make any determinations about how exactly we'll proceed.
Thank you. Cheryl. There's a question in the chat from Brian. Sheila, I like the way you planted the ballot initiative seed. Is there any momentum for such an effort?
I think there's momentum in terms of thinking that it's a possibility. It's a very expensive proposition. I'm guessing here, but probably $250,000 to be able to get them enough signatures to put an initiative on the ballot. So that's a very different way to fund things. And so that's a lot more money than we're used to raising. But I think it's definitely worth the discussion.
Another question here is, I think if I'm understanding the way it's posed, is really to, we talked a lot about the specific bills that were presented this session and the outcomes of those, but getting a little bit higher level input from you all on what is the strategy at the state level? What are the policy opportunities and directives? And this person is asking really specifically from the perspective of being a service provider and working directly with clients who are saying, what is our state doing and what can be done? And if I didn't paraphrase that question correctly, please feel free to correct me, Joy C. But high level.
I would just,
go ahead.
I begin by saying that it's important to recognize, because I run across this fairly frequently, that when we get talking about the legislature and bills, that sometimes people feel disconnected, that tell me about something that directly benefits, like, folks I work for or whatever. And they have to recognize that the absence of state funding is directly results in those we serve being unable to have a safe, decent, affordable place to live. I mean, that's fundamental to the thing. But I think that has to be recognized, that we need to do this work at the legislative level so that it's not trickle down. It's would make units in communities across, if we double production, that I forget, 1,800 units or 18,000 units would be built over 10 years. That would make a huge difference in communities across this state. Big thing also going on at this time, I think, across the state, and with the support of the Montana Healthcare Foundation, but is the Housing is Healthcare Fuse initiative. But I think overall what that is about is trying to integrate housing and healthcare and support services so that they are not separate silos, that they're working in coordination with one another. And I think that's a major trend that I think we'll see benefit. And I think it's particularly important as we're aging. We kind of lose track of that, but Montana is one of the oldest, per capita states, and that's the need to have services linked to affordable housing will become increasingly important.
I'd like to take a crack at this one as well. I think the truth is that Montana does not have a housing policy. The Montana housing policy is to take federal money and pass it through as best they can. And the Montana Board of Housing and the Housing Division are amazing at how well they can stand up programs and get them implemented. But there is no housing policy in Montana. We haven't addressed it. And that's why it's so difficult to get things through the legislature, I think. And to me, I can't disconnect money and policy. It's like, if you have a policy, then you have to fund that policy. But we don't have one in Montana. And that's why the Montana Housing Coalition continues to work on these things, so we can figure out with all of the parties involved what Montana's housing policy should be and could be. And again, I want to emphasize to the nth degree how really positive and impactful and progressive the Board of Housing and the Housing Division are, but there's only so much federal funds to work with. We have to figure out a way to secure some state funding.
Sheila, if I might add, that one of the conversations we've had at the coalition level has been, how is it that we advocate for there to be somebody within the governor's office that is specifically focused on housing in Montana? Because to Sheila's point, we really are lacking a cohesive housing policy in the state. We have an excellent Board of Housing and Department of Commerce staff. But when we talk about from the executive branch, when we talk about from the state government, what is our vision as a state, and how are we tackling this much larger, this this really big sector challenge, housing and real estate. And I think that's an area that we'd like to see some strength around.
That's great. And I think, some clarification here, what is practical in this moment for a client? From my perspective, where I sit, I feel like there's a lot of COVID money coming through the state and through local municipalities. And there are a lot of opportunities to support different client needs that we haven't been able to support in the past or in quite this way. So trying to stay up to speed on what those immediate resources are and how we can get those out to the people who need them and use those as part of our recovery. In terms of the most immediate thing, that's what comes to mind for me.
To that point, and Cheryl's on the line here, can speak to it. The Emergency Rental Assistance Program provides an opportunity for folks who are, behind on their rent, behind on their utilities, to get to zero and maybe have some assistance going forward for a period. And there's a lot of money in that program, and it's on all of our part to try to get the word out and help people connect to that. We appreciate the Department of Commerce Herculean efforts in getting that underway, and the leadership of NeighborWorks Montana and providing kind of a support network to help people complete those applications. But Cheryl, do you want to talk about that a bit?
I might cover a little bit at the closing plenary tomorrow. So unless there's specific questions, I might hold it until then.
Okay.
A follow on to that from Barbara Miller, are there opportunities in the period coming up between the sessions to pursue that COVID relief money and consider communities where there have been higher COVID death rates and the role of housing in that dynamic? It's an interesting question, Barbara. Any reactions to that? And Bronwyn, I will get back to your question.
Well, I think House Bill 632, if you take a look at it, it really is the COVID omnibus bill. And there is no specific mention of housing in that, save for $11 million for homeless services, which could be used for construction. Those of you that do development know that $11 million, which it won't be all used for construction, is a pittance, probably not even one project. But the point is, what you can do is look at that bill, stay in touch with the various departments, mostly Commerce, that are going to be handling the process for applying for those. Work with your cities and counties to decide if they can put in an application for that infrastructure money. That's really the only COVID money I see going for housing construction. There's lots of COVID money for emergency rental services. There's some for home ownership services, but that's not creating new homeowners. That's keeping existing homeowners in their homes because of a loss of income during the COVID crisis. So that's what I see coming out of COVID money. It could be more. There could be some infrastructure money that's coming down specifically that's not related to COVID. There could be housing funds. But today, what I can say is read House Bill 632. It's not very complicated. It's only 6 pages long. And you can see what the legislature had in mind. I'll move to Bronwyn's comment about, will the coalition try again for the next session? Of course, we will. We have to. We're so compelled by this, all of us, to spend our days and nights thinking about how we're going to attack this in the session. I would say one specific thing that people can do right now is that if you're a developer or a nonprofit and you are going to apply for federal housing tax credits through the Board of Housing, go to every single one of the legislatures that represent that area and get a letter of support from them, so they understand this is happening in my legislative district, and if there was more money, it would get funded. We'll have another strategy after the Board of Housing makes the commitments about which gets funded and which don't, about having everybody that didn't get funded contact their legislators and say, gosh, we would have had a chance. I'm saying this rather coldly. We would have had a chance if we would have been able to pass that state housing tax credit and send that same information to the governor. But yes, we will definitely be at it again next session, and we'll start within a few months, just talking about the interim committees, the Cold Trust study, all of that, and being active in that.
Great. And just want to draw everyone's attention to Cheryl's response to Barbara that there will be some opportunities for additional public comment and engagement around how COVID relief funds are used. Question here about, for all of you who've been active and talking to legislators, how much is the change in home prices and the increased pressure on housing influencing the ability to pass these bills? You know, it sounds like there's some question here about whether that's creating some pressure against it, maybe because of all of the other priorities and needs in the state. How much is the current dynamic impacting our ability to get traction?
I don't think it was a negative at all. I'll ask Andrea to jump in here afterwards, but I don't think it was a negative at all. It was positive. It was a positive force that more people are having housing shortages and apartment shortages, and businesses can't grow and workers can't find housing. It just wasn't enough to get it across the finish line. And the shade on all of that is that there's a feeling that one of the problems, a big problem with creating more homes is the regulatory climate. And I think that's part of the puzzle, but it's not the whole puzzle. And so we did some things, the legislature did some things to move the regulatory climate a bit, but way more is needed. So Peggy or Andrea, if you want to write in on that comment of mine.
No, I mean, I would just say that it was a positive as well, that there was far more recognition of the impacts to legislators, their districts. And I'll just also mention that I think one of the challenges we have in the state is we're a non-disclosure state. There's some lack of data to be able to tell us some real impacts to some of our markets around who's buying where and how much. And that, you know, going back to the need for more data, a lot of times we really need to, just like we'll hear in the storytelling, I'm sure session tomorrow, impactful data has to be paired with really strong storytelling. And we certainly would benefit from that in this case as well. Peggy?
I would agree. I don't think that it did it impacted the ability to get, they didn't put it either or with the bills that we were bringing. It did cause more attention on the crunch for housing. What we need to do a better job, I mean, we always can do better. We're always in the process of becoming, is that we got to work more on creating that link that the folks that we're looking that need housing that's affordable are people in the workforce. I mean, you drive around town and you see job wanted signs, and a big part of that you'll hear from employers, well, they can't find a place to live. There's a little bit of a disconnect, I think, from the legislative side and thinking, not understanding the folks that we're talking about and some of the bills that we're bringing are their workers. They're not necessarily all seniors or folks that maybe are in a situation where they're not part of the workforce or an active part of the workers. These are their workers. And so I think a focus next interim is do a better job of linking up with employers and helping them understand what we're trying to do here will help them and help their workers. That's probably the disconnect. I think there's a sense of the individual homes that are being built and the pressure on that are part of the workforce, but so are the folks that we're trying to get housing for as well. That's where we've got to build a better link.
This really ties so well to the session prior to this on local housing policy. We heard some similar topics there, you know, in Whitefish, they're really shifting to talking about attainable rather than affordable housing in their language and their focus. And in Helena, you know, Sharon Hogan was saying, what's the difference between affordable housing and workforce housing? It's the same thing. We just need to be framing it differently. So I think that message is starting to.
I do need to comment that we have to be careful that there is a challenge when it's considered not strategic to talk about the housing needs of people who struggle, who because of disability or because they're elderly, and we have to be silent. And I got it, and I'm not a person that's easily silent, but there's something wrong with that picture that we can't talk about those things because it's you know, I thought the senator did a great job in his closing when he says, where are these people to live? I think he said, because he was criticized. We'll only go to those, you know, those poor people, but who don't work and things. So I mean, I think we have to find a way to also to be silent on those needs, because it reinforces a horrible myth that those folks are already taken care of, and that's just not even close to the truth. Not even close to the truth. And so this is about, we're all serving workers and and the employees, but we're also serving their moms and dads who work their entire lives and yet have a very low fixed income, or people who've become disabled. And so we have to talk about the housing needs of everybody, and it sometimes reinforces the worst kinds of stigmas when we can't be a part of the conversation, because it will be, and I agree, we have to be strategic, but it's somehow we have to overcome that a little bit to make sure that everyone's needs are viewed as necessary.
And Michael, this is Peggy, and I think you make a good point there, is that I think there is a little bit of misunderstanding too, that fits that some legislators, some folks think, well, you talk about that certain part of the population, they do think they're being taken care of. They maybe Social Security is taking care of them or whatever it is. And that might be part of it is, no, they're not. So it's fair part of the conversation. I think there is some misunderstanding that they aren't the folks that need help too.
In one, just as a little behind the scenes, behind the curtain, an example of this was during the special subcommittee, one of the special subcommittees for House Bill 632, which was basically all that American Recovery Plan money that came in through the state. And I heard a representative say, $11 million for homelessness. We don't even have that many homeless people in Montana. And this was a representative from a small Montana community that really might not have much of an understanding. And I think, that really comes back down to what we as a coalition, we carry that burden to really help we and our colleagues of helping share information and education and really messaging around why people should care about this. Because people in Columbus, there are homeless people in Columbus, they just don't see them. They are living in camper trailers up the road on a Forest Service. There's lots of information out there, and there's probably more that we need to put together strategically. But yeah, there's an interesting conversation happening nationally and here in Montana as well, where we really are talking about a home is more about social justice than it is about a capitalistic opportunity. And that's, there's a shift. That shift's not going to be overnight. But that's, what we can do as a coalition is we can keep that conversation going and help raise awareness.
Another question here. What can be done about out-of-state buyers driving up the cost of homes? The demand just seems to keep going up. What can we do?
Well, the economists would tell us that it's a demand-supply equation, so we can increase the supply. And we can't control that out-of-state buyers have enough money to put cash down at a $20,000 or $50,000 above the asking price, but we can control that there's more homes on the market. That would make a difference.
I think Montana, a lot of our Montana housing crisis is a wage crisis. Our wages need to catch up to our cost of living, and what the new Zoom land economy allows for is folks who their salary is not tied to their community, so they can afford a lot more house. And but we need to pay our workers more. All of us are employers, in addition to being housing developers. We have to pay our people more, but it's if you can work a full-time job and can't afford to live in your community, there's something wrong. There's something wrong with that. And so there should be upward pressure on wages, and we need to pay people what they need to live.
I will mention that neighboring states do have housing policy in place that builds homes specific to the residents of those communities. And we dabbled a little bit into understanding what is in with Montana's statute that would or would not allow us to do that. Here in Montana, I do know of a developer in Montana that is pursuing a for sale homeownership project that will be able to prioritize residents. And it's basically somewhat of the same format as when you prove your residency to attend the university. So it's using that same basically year-long address that you can identify yourself as a resident here. There's a lot behind that. There's a lot behind that very charitable developer, quite frankly, and some of the profit sharing that they're willing to do to reduce the cost of a home for somebody that is a resident. But those are some models that we could look to. So I don't think we have a lot developed. I don't think we have a lot of Montana-based examples, but I think we've got some things that we can look at in other states. And then if there's not the enabling legislation here in Montana, then those are some of the things we need to talk about making changes to.
Great. So just a couple more minutes here. I'm not seeing any more questions at this point. So does anyone have additional thoughts or comments that you didn't get to share yet, or parting thoughts for this session?
Well, Kaya, I'd like to just close by thanking everyone again. You know, to have almost 90 participants in this at one time is an amazing amount of recognition. I think that Montana does need a coherent housing policy, and we need all the help we can get in getting Montana to that stage. Really want to thank the co-presenters here, Michael, Andrea, and Peggy, for their thoughts and ideas here, all the work they did during the session. And many of those people on the call were right there with us all the time, talking to legislators, talking to committee members, really trying hard to get these bills passed. We were not successful with our 2 money bills, but you know, we got further than we ever had before. We got all.
Uh-oh, did we lose Sheila?
I think what she meant to say is that with one bill, with the housing credit bill, we got all the way to the governor's desk.
Credit, unheard of. We've never done that. And Board of Housing and the other, or I'm sorry, Housing Division and the other organizers, this has been really, really a great session, and I appreciate your time and help in getting it organized.
Wonderful. You all are an incredible force. I will say, Sheila, I learned from you many years ago, if you don't talk about it, it won't happen, right? So we just got to keep talking about it, and eventually it'll happen. And this year, I think, is proof of some of that continuing progress. So thanks to all of you panelists. This is the end of our day today, and we are looking forward to seeing everyone in the morning. We hope you'll join us for the optional coffee talk at 8 o'clock, and then our awards and plenary session at 9. Thank you so much, everyone.
You can only deliver coffee through the Zoom. That would be fabulous. It's the next technology.
Might have to arrange that on your own, folks.
Join us for lunch at a meetup tomorrow, and we can talk more about.
Sign up for that, Sheila. Could you let them know how they sign up?
Well, I'd like to, but.
Yeah, I can let you know. So if you go to the homepage, the Whova homepage, and you click on community on the left tab, and actually I can even share my screen. You can. So here you go. You click on community, you click on meetups and virtual meets, and you can scroll down here tomorrow, creating a coherent housing policy in Montana. And you can RSVP, and then you can join the meeting room at noon tomorrow to continue the conversation.
Thank you, Kate. That's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye all.